I believe that the quarterback battle between Jake Retzlaff and Gerry Bohanon will not last as long as many might expect it might for the BYU football program. Why? Well, stay tuned.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen and or view of the day, and thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU, and today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more, and of course, all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everybody all day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, let's talk BYU training camp. The BYU football program will report formally for training camp on Wednesday. Our first media availability, I would anticipate, probably comes at the tail end of this week, whether that's Friday and or Saturday. And it'll be a month-long sprint, as they say, but really it's a marathon as BYU gets ready to take on Southern Illinois on August 31st. I, for one, am super excited to have the season informally here. Now, training camp is the unofficial start to the season. It formally, I said, kicks off on August 31 when they take on Southern Illinois, not Northern Illinois, as a certain BYU running back said on this podcast not too long ago. Hey, you know what? Directional schools are what they are, but the Cougars will take on Southern Illinois August 31st. And I've got some bold predictions / storylines / I don't even know what to call them, superlatives that I believe will play out during training camp for the Cougars. And we're going to roll through those right now. First things first. I mentioned at the start of today's show that I believe that quarterback battle between Jake Retzlaff and Gerry Bohanon will not last as long as many of you and many of the media might believe it'll last. I believe that it is a two-man race. It's no offense to Trayson Bourget. It's nothing against McKay Hillstead. Barring a catastrophic injury to one of the two true contenders, speaking of Jake Retzlaff and or Gerry Bohanon, that is a quarterback battle that I believe will last for about 2 weeks during training camp for the Cougars. So that starts coming up, I guess, formally Thursday when BYU, in theory, takes the field for the first time as a team, and it'll last for about 2 weeks, I believe, and then that decision will be set in stone as to who BYU starting quarterback is going to be. Do I expect an announcement from BYU when those 2 weeks are up as to who the starting quarterback is? Absolutely not. There is no way that Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, passing game coordinator Semi Taulanga, and the others who may be involved in that decision-making process will let us know who BYU starting quarterback is, and it really won't be revealed, I don't think, maybe until kickoff against Southern Illinois. I could very easily see a scenario during that week one depth chart reveal during those game notes that come out has an or between Jake Retzlaff and Gerry Bohanon's name. But I do believe that 2 weeks into training camp, BYU will have decided who that is going to be. And it is my prediction that Jake Retzlaff ends up as QB1 for BYU with Gerry Bohanon as his backup. Next prediction I've got for you guys is that I believe you should get to know the name Darius Lassiter. I'm not saying that Lassiter is going to morph into BYU 2024's version of Puka Nacua, Austin Collie, Cody Hoffman, etc. But Darius Lassiter, I believe, has what it takes to be the undisputed number one option at wide receiver for the Cougars, even though I believe BYU's wide receiving core to be the deepest and talented on the entire BYU football roster. Lassiter has drawn rave reviews from multiple people connected with the program, our so-called practice insiders and others who I've talked to, who have said that keep an eye on this kid. He really has what it takes to really emerge this year and be a force for us. That is the people talking about their program, speaking of BYU. Get to know Darius Lassiter's name. He had a really nice, I think, debut season for the Cougars with a lot of highlight reel plays. I think those become more commonplace, and he may challenge to be the true number one option at wide receiver for the Cougars this fall. Number 3, sticking with the offense, Austin Leusa is going to be BYU starting right guard, I believe, come the start of the season against Southern Illinois. I believe that 4 of the 5 positions on BYU's offensive line, starting-wise, are all but locked up going into training camp. I think it's Caleb Etienne at left tackle, Waylon Lapuaho at left guard. Our good friend Connor Pay is obviously entrenched as BYU starting center, and I believe that Braden Keim will be BYU's right tackle. There could be some adjustment with, I think, Caleb Etienne and or Keim switching sides at tackle, But I believe that Austin Leusa will be BYU starting right guard, rounding out that starting five. And he's going to be what many BYU fans hoped that Isaiah Jota was going to be when he announced his transfer from Colorado to BYU. Jota was a very highly thought of junior college guy coming out of Snow College, but I still think he needs some seasoning and some time to get caught up. And I believe that Austin Leusa is going to actually be more of what BYU fans hoped Jota would be, whereas he starts at guard versus tackle in the case of Jota. Flipping over to the defense, I believe that one of the young defensive ends for BYU on their roster, think of the names, Ephraim Asiata, look at Orion Maile Kafusi, Viliami Apua, any of those young defensive ends, Akini Fonohema or Asane Tuala. There's a number of young defensive ends for BYU on this roster. One of them, if not more, hopefully will emerge during training camp and take some of the pressure off of guys like Tyler Batty and Isaiah Banya to really carry BYU's pass rush this season. There's a lot of people out there who are very bullish on Tyler Batty's hopes to be an all Big 12 type performer for BYU's defense. He will not achieve that without having other guys step up. Maybe it's even a guy who's an upperclassman at this point, like Bodie Schoonover, who emerges and allows some of that pressure to be taken off the shoulders of Tyler Batty in terms of the double teams and the other situations he finds himself in. I believe that one of those young guys will step up, and they need to have that. They need to have a more robust pass rush for any and all success in Jay Hill's defensive scheme, and hopefully those young bucks can step up and be that for the BYU football program. I'm also going to be looking at what Shea Bryant-Strother is going to be able to bring to BYU. He's played for a long time in multiple positions at UCLA, and he's now here as a grad transfer playing with BYU. What can he offer? I think his simple fact that he has that institutional knowledge of football, speaking of having played defensive end, rush end, linebacker, insert any other position he played during his time as UCLA Bruin, I believe that Shea Bryant-Strother is going to be a name to track because he is going to be able to contribute in a myriad of ways. I know that Jack Kelly is that so-called do-it-all guy for BYU transferring in from Weber State. Do not forget the name Shea Bryant-Strother. I believe he has got the goods to be a similar type impact guy in different spots like a Jack Kelly. Jack Kelly probably starts for BYU, whereas Shea Bryant-Strother is probably going to be a situational guy. But do not forget a CBS, as I'm going to start calling him, Shea Bryant-Strother, and his capability of helping out BYU. And then the final defensive prediction I've got for you guys is that this will be the year Jacob Robinson finally takes that next step and becomes that well-rounded cornerback who I believe has all Big 12 capability within him. He's been a big play artist for most of his career, but has been inconsistent in terms of play-to-play in his ability to contribute for the BYU Cougars. I believe Jacob Robinson will use this year to really launch himself to the next level, and hopefully it will launch him truly to the next level. Speaking of the NFL, he's not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy, but he is technically very, very sound. And so long as he continues to kind of progress along the path he has been going, I believe he emerges from this training camp as the best well-rounded player he's ever been in his playing career, and that could contribute to a lot of success for BYU defensively. And then my final bold prediction is that there will be at least one player during this fall camp series, a month-long training camp, that's going to all the still headlines. We're going to be out there as a media corps. I'll talk about it on this podcast. Guys like Jay Drew and Mitch Harper will write about it for their respective outlets. Other podcasts like Jeff Hansen and Give Him Hell Brigham will talk about guys, or a guy who emerges as a star during training camp for BYU, and that player will not see the field during the regular season. It's probably going to be a walk-on of some variety. I don't really have a name for you in mind because it really is going to be somebody who emerges seemingly in the first couple of practices for BYU, but that player, for whatever reason, will not actually see the field this fall, and it's going to be one of those storylines that'll dominate training camp, but that'll be lost once September gets here and we're really into the meat and potatoes portion of the football season. Let me know. Am I wrong in any of those assessments? Do you think I'm up in the night in believing what I believe about the BYU football program? Let us know. Drop us a note in the YouTube comments below. Send us a note on social media. Drop us an email, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. Anything you got for us. Welcome that feedback. And we'll be tracking many of these storylines and how I do on these bold predictions, because inevitably I'll be wrong on some. I'll hit on some. And we'll see where everything kind of pans out in the end as the month-long training camp gets ready to start officially on Wednesday for BYU football. Now, there is a major glaring concern for the BYU Cougars on defense that is not getting any better, especially considering in light of some news that came over the weekend in terms of a commitment to BYU's arch rival Utah. What is BYU doing at defensive tackle, and will it really ever get any better for the Cougars? We're talking about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Ibotta. Now, Ibotta is here for you guys no matter what you're trying to buy this summer. Trust me, I just got home off of a vacation. I bought a lot of stuff for that vacation, but I can tell you I have used Ibotta for a long time, and they are a big key in helping me save in this time when we're all seeming like we're spending a lot more than we're bringing in. It's a free app that helps you earn cash back every time you shop. Think about that. No matter where you go, you can earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, and you make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing by getting some of that sweet cash back from our friends at Ibotta. The average Ibotta user earns over $256 per year. I can tell you that my wife and I began using Ibotta, I think it's at least 5 years back, if not longer than that. We've saved a lot of money and been able to cash it in on a number of different things. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and many, many more. So right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta using the promo code LOCKEDONCollege when you register with Ibotta. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Once again, that's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and it's all courtesy of your friends over at Ibotta. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Factor Meals. Now, many of us are trying to get in better shape. Trust me, I'm going into a crazy time of year. Any of you who know what I do during football season know that I am here, there, and everywhere. And Factor Meals is going to be a big part of my success, hopefully, to get myself in better shape during this football season. The best part about Factor Meals is they have got chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. They're fully cooked, my friends. So no matter how busy you are, like me during football season, you always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today you kick off your new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? 35 different meals, more than 60 add-ons to choose from every single week. You always find new flavors to explore and new meals to enjoy. Crush your wellness goals all summer and football season long with dietitian-approved meals and ingredients that you can trust, and make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Once again, it saves you time. Keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, no prepping, no cooking, or even cleaning up. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use the promo code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your first month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. And it's all courtesy of your friends over at Factor Meals. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, have you checked out our friends over the Locked On Sports Today podcast/show? It is a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories about all the streaming going on Fox Sports or ESPN. Know how they like to embrace debate and you're having to turn down the volume because you're sick of all the screaming going on? Well, Locked On Sports Today is here for you with can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. And it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, of course, where it is your team every day. All right, BYU football has a massive concern when it comes to the defensive tackle position. I'm not trying to make this like woe is BYU football, but considering in light of Semi Taulanga committing to the University of Utah as a defensive tackle at a modern-day high school down in Southern California, there was a lot of hope that BYU be able to pull off a recruiting win and steal him away from UCLA and obviously Utah, where he committed. The issue I see right now for BYU defensive tackle is on paper, there's not a lot of ready-made options for BYU on that roster defensive tackle. I think are going to step up and be stars for BYU this fall in a position group, by the way, that was much maligned a year ago. Injuries, just ineffective play, really dampened BYU's ability to hold up, especially against the run in their debut season in the Big 12 Conference. If Jay Hill's defense is to succeed with BYU, he needs defensive tackles that can eat up blockers, provide some pass rush, but also make it miserable for opposing game planners, speaking of offensive coordinators, to really game plan, because they cannot envision a way to get around these defensive, in theory, have on their defensive line. Utah has a ton of talent on that defensive front, and Semi Taulanga seems to just be the cherry on top of what has been a rich tradition at Utah. I saw some of the social media posts that were up there when Semi Taulanga committed to Utah from BYU fans saying, what is BYU going to do at defensive tackle? And it's a very valid question. I had a few of you send me a text and or comments asking me to talk about this, and let's get into it. Here's the issue that BYU faces right now is, why would any star defensive tackle look at BYU's defense and say, you know what, that's where I want to go play? There's not been a really strong tradition of it, really dating back to Kairos Tonga. And even before that, who else from BYU's defensive front has been a standout that has been somebody that BYU players say, you know what, that's what I want to go do. I want to go play for the BYU Cougars at defensive tackle and really get tied up with multiple opposing offensive linemen every single play. BYU has to find a way to highlight their defensive tackles to give them some hope of recruiting higher profile defensive linemen to join the BYU football program. In the recruiting sphere right now, going into the 2025 cycle for BYU, is there's not a lot out there for BYU. Could some guys emerge during this upcoming prep football season? I sure as heck hope so, because BYU right now, if you look at 24/7 and On3 and look at the offers that BYU has out to defensive linemen, there's just not a lot of guys out there, and there's not a lot of ready-made, oh, that's a guy that BYU should be chasing right now. They very well may have to look at the transfer portal and or junior college ranks once again to bolster this position group. Looking at the season ahead right now, you're hoping that John Nelson and some combo of Luke To'omalatai, David Law too, if Blake Mangelson truly is moving inside the defensive tackle, you're hoping that a combination of those guys or other guys on the roster, because the defensive tackle position for BYU does not look all that appetizing. It's nothing against Joshua Singh, Tyler Little, Dallin Havea, Dallin Johnson, John Taumoepeau, Iosefa Latuli. Those are all the other names at the defensive tackle position for BYU on the roster right now. And which of them in your mind screams, I am going to be that guy for BYU at defensive tackle? They need one of them to stand out. And I believe that John Nelson has the capability of doing that. But his issue is he's not stayed healthy for an entire season in quite some time for BYU. He's going into his senior season. If he has hopes of playing professionally, obviously having a healthy senior campaign will do wonders for him to accomplish that goal. But who else is going to step up alongside him? Is it going to be David Law, too, who showed promise at points during last season as a junior college transfer into the program? Can he really emerge and be a force for BYU? Or is it going to be John Taumoepeau as a guy who is probably undersized for the position? Can he start to show out? When Danny Saili decided to leave BYU following spring ball, that thinned out a defensive tackle position that really needed a guy like him to be a rock in the middle of that defensive line. Now you're going to be hoping that guys that are weighing 285, 305, 295 pounds are capable of holding up against offensive lines that are very, very talented at the Power 4 level, especially in the Big 12. BYU had a lot of questions when it came to defending the run a year ago, and the defensive tackle spot really hasn't gotten much better than it was a year ago in my mind. Now, I'd love to be wrong about this. I'd love to show up mid-season and say, wow, BYU's defensive line is absolutely kicking butt out there, and the defensive tackles are absolutely holding their own. And if they do that, I'll give mad props to guys like Sione Puha, Chad Kauha'aha'a, and also Gerry Anderson, who are all on BYU staff, whether it's as a position coach in the case of Puha, a defensive analyst, or I guess the senior analyst on BYU staff in the case of Chad K, or just as a consultant in the case of Gerry Anderson. You need to have those guys earn their paychecks by coaching up this defensive tackle front, because right now, I've got little to no faith that it's going to get much better for BYU in this near-term future, because I just don't see where the options are coming from at defensive tackle, and also the future of that position group. Man, there's a dearth of talent, at least on the recruiting front right now for BYU, that's not already committed elsewhere. Could BYU flip Semi Taulanga at some point down the line? Maybe so, but I would not be betting on that, because he went through a very public recruiting battle with BYU, Utah, and UCLA in the mix for him. And he ultimately opted to pick the University of Utah, where they've got a defensive line that goes 3 and 4 guys deep at multiple positions. BYU right now, I'm having a hard time envisioning a 2 deep that has not got questions for me at defensive tackle. That's how thin I believe this position group is for the Cougars going into training camp. And you're going to have to see an uptick at some point, whether it is the current crop of guys on the defensive front for BYU that decides to make me eat crow, or if you have all of a sudden some kid, whether it's from Timpview High School up the road in Provo or somebody clear across the country during the upcoming prep season who really emerges, the BYU can latch on to early in the season and really kind of sell them on what BYU has to offer them. But until that happens, I'm going to remain skeptical about BYU's defensive line, especially at defensive tackle. It's got to become a strength for BYU for Jay Hill's defense to truly succeed at the level he wants it to succeed at in Provo. But without standout defensive linemen who are more than capable of eating up multiple offensive line blocks, being able to withstand double and triple teams, being able to provide some pass rush from the interior, especially when it comes to the nose and defensive tackle positions. Without that, this is a defense that is fatally flawed, and that is a massive, massive concern for any Cougar fan out there, because without standout defensive line play, the history suggests that the defense that obviously has been coached up by Kyle Whittingham has been imparted to guys like Kalani Sitake, Gerry Anderson, Sione Puha, who are all now coaching at BYU. They know it's imperative that you have those defensive linemen that can really step up and be the stars and the unsung heroes of the defense. Linebackers, defensive backs probably are going to get the headlines in a defense like that, but any of them who know what they're talking about will give credit to the defensive linemen in front of him. And right now, it does not look all that great for BYU's defensive line. And once again, I just don't see ready-made options out on the recruiting front either. And that should lead you to have some concern about what BYU is trying to do. Does that mean you may need to make a change at the defensive tackle coach's spot? I'm not saying that needs to happen right away, but you got to see an uptick at some point. And if it doesn't happen soon, once again, that defense may be doomed to fail before it really gets started with Jay Hill as BYU's defensive coordinator. But it's a really, really kind of curious balance that BYU is trying to strike here, and we'll see if they really can find an answer for it in training camp and also on the recruiting front, because they absolutely have to find those answers, or else they're going to have an issue for seemingly years to come under Kalani Sitake's tenure as BYU head coach. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we'll finish up today's show with a look at some new roster limits that the NCAA is going to implement as soon as next year. It's actually a really, really positive thing, I believe, for BYU, and we'll get into why as we close out this edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, all summer long, all of us have been having fun, whether it's out on vacation, but if you want to have some fun in the sports betting realm, well, that's where our friends at FanDuel come into the mix. If you want to believe that BYU, even with the defensive tackle woes that I just talked about, can overachieve a 4.5 win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, you can do that with FanDuel.com and their easy-to-use app. If you believe that BYU basketball is poised to do some incredible things, 99 days away from today, by the way, when Kevin Young and his basketball era as BYU men's basketball coach get underway, they have 55-1 odds as potential national champions at FanDuel. You can take advantage of all that with our friends at FanDuel right now. All summer long, they're hooking up all of our customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. And you can take advantage of it by heading over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer right now. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. All customers getting a boost or bonus daily, and it's all courtesy of FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please consider subscribing and or signing up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. I'm passing along insider tidbits I'm hearing from our sources out there in Cougar Nation to you guys. If you want to be a part of it, you get a 14-day free trial. It's $5 a month afterwards to support the show and get the insider intel that you crave. Click the link in the show notes, whether you're watching and or listening to this. Just scroll down a little bit. You'll see a nice little link there. Sign up with your phone number. join us and get insider intel you won't find anywhere else coming to you in the form of a text message on your mobile device. All right, before we go on today's show, let's talk about the future of college sports in the NCAA. Now, as part of the House versus NCAA settlement is starting to really kind of emerge out there, there is going to be some very, very interesting changes when it comes to college sports, most notably in the form of expanded roster sizes. Now, roster sizes are set to expand in all sports, but it also gives each school an opportunity to fund all those roster slots with a full scholarship. Remember, back in the yesteryear of the NCAA, baseball, for example, they've had 11.6 scholarships to dole out to 35 to 40 guys on a baseball roster. Under the new parameters established in the House versus NCAA settlement, which, by the way, is still not finalized, but it very much looks like it's close to being finalized by the lawyers involved, that will expand the roster size for baseball in the case of BYU and Division I programs from it'll get rid of the scholarship limit. What I mean by that is that the 11.6 scholarships they've had to dole out are going away. Instead, you'll now have a maximum roster size of 34 players. You, speaking of BYU or any other institution out there, could reward all 34 of those players with a full scholarship, or you could expand out your official scholarship to 20 scholarships, etc. The biggest change here is that each of these roster sizes no longer has a set number of scholarships attached to it. It's all about the number of guys or girls, or women, I should say, on your roster. You can reward them with full scholarships or no scholarships. It's up to the respective institutions, but it is expanding the field to have upwards of 700 new scholarships on an annual basis for NCAA sports. It's going to be really interesting to see how universities absorb this and how they're able to fund those extra scholarships. When it comes to BYU, I see this as a major opportunity for BYU. I know there are a number of you, I mentioned baseball earlier on, who are huge baseball fans and want to see BYU baseball become a bigger force in the Big 12 and just be a bigger force in college baseball overall. If BYU, in theory, decides to go from 11.6 scholarships in baseball to offering full ride scholarships to all 34 roster slots they will have allotted to them, that is going to go a long way to helping BYU baseball be far more competitive. The other issue is that every other program out there they're competing against will also have that same opportunity. So you will see a number of high-level baseball programs continuing to be dominant forces because they have those full ride scholarships. But BYU, using baseball as an example, could make themselves a differentiator by allowing BYU coaches, in the case of BYU baseball, to go out and offer all 34 of the roster guys a full scholarship. That will expand the opportunity to bring in higher talent to BYU. It's a similar case in the case of, you look at gymnastics, you look at volleyball. Volleyball scholarships are set to go up. I think it's like 6 for men right now to 18 roster spots that in theory could be full ride scholarships. You could see BYU really expand their opportunities when it comes to getting better talent into the various sports at BYU by giving full ride scholarships. Now, that's going to require millions more in terms of the overall dollars allotted to scholarships if you want to do this, but it's a huge opportunity for BYU if they continue to want to have one of those more robust college athletic departments across the board. Well, the way to do it now is do a lot, and they're saying somewhere between $7 and $15 million to round out all those full scholarships if you want to have that. And oh, by the way, there's this other thing that's coming out with House versus NCAA is beginning next year, there will be revenue sharing from BYU and other institutions between $20 and $22 million annually that'll be doled out to BYU's athletes. Now, the issue is that obviously are subject to Title IX restrictions. You will see an even split, at least in theory, 50% of that money going to male athletes and 50% going to female athletes. And I do wonder how that's going to affect the overall bottom line for BYU to have potentially $7 to $15 million in extra scholarship costs, in addition to having to dole out between $20 and $22 million. And the additional thing is going into future years, by the end of the 10-year process that this current House versus NCAA settlement has, is that allotment that's being doled out to athletes could expand to as high as $33 million annually. BYU is going to have to come up with some extra cash very quickly, or change some of the ways they go about funding different things to find this money, because that's not an insignificant amount of money. There have been many, many years that $33 million alone would have been a third, if not more, of BYU's total athletic budget. Now, going into the Big 12, the Cougars have absolutely expanded that budget. They're making more money than ever. So obviously they have the means to continue to add at a pretty even pace. But this is a big opportunity for BYU to really make a name for themselves on the NCAA circuit. Now, are they going to be able to dole out, like I said, full scholarships to every single roster slot that's now allotted to them year one? Maybe not. But if I'm Tom Holmoe, I'm any of the other BYU administrators out there, and if I'm a coach at BYU, speaking of any team out there, you're absolutely asking for as many full ride scholarships as you can get to recruit with. The other change also is going to reduce BYU football's allotment. The roster size will go from what is currently 123 players. You have 85 scholarship spots, but you have 123 roster spots for BYU football to 105 roster slots. Could BYU be on the hook for an extra 20 full ride football scholarships? Yeah, I believe they will and should be on the hook for that. But the issue is, where are the walk-ons going to go? BYU, along with a number of other high-level football programs, would and will not be where they have been without having walk-ons who have come in and really made a name for themselves. For every standout player that comes in as a scholarship athlete and becomes a star, there are an equal number, it feels like, of guys who started as a no-name walk-on who emerged and became star players. Think of Dax Milne as a preferred walk-on from Brigham High School. Many thought that Braden Cosper was the star jewel of that recruiting cycle, and Dax Milne decided to come to BYU as a walk-on. Well, nothing against Braden Cosper, but Dax Milne is now going into his fourth year in the NFL, whereas Braden Cosper was beset by injuries during his entire career as a Cougar. You need to have an allotment for walk-ons. You got to find a way around that when it comes to the settlement, because doing away with walk-ons, especially in football, but even more so for other sports, doesn't seem like the right way for the NCAA to go about this. But then again, when has the NCAA really done anything other than enrich themselves at the expense of the student athlete? That's another question for another day and another topic for another day. But some crazy, crazy times are ahead. But looking at it overall, this is a huge opportunity for BYU athletics to really stand out, I think, if they can find a way to fund as many full-ride scholarships and as quickly as possible going into the 2025 season, obviously a year from now. You got 365 days, give or take a few, to figure this out. Start hitting up boosters. Start allotting cash from those media rights deals from the Big 12. Start earmarking other things that you can find ways to generate the cash necessary to differentiate yourselves and give these full ride scholarships to these various programs. If you can do that, it is going to allow BYU athletics to continue to be one of those more well-rounded athletic departments, I should say, in all of college sports, which they have obviously been known for quite a while now. But at the same time, you got to have the money to do that. There are a number of high-level programs out there who are already budgeting for this, finding ways to cut back in different departments to allot the cash for it. And BYU, I believe, will be no different, but it may be a little different on BYU's timeline, because we all know that BYU doesn't just go into debt for anything, and they rarely go into debt, period, when it comes to BYU athletics. But this is something that BYU is going to have to find a way to fund very, very quickly. All right, that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Cougars. A big thank you once again for all of your guys' support. It's good to be back from vacation. Had a great week off, but it's go time, everybody. Training camp for BYU football gets underway. Coming up next month, we have BYU soccer, I think, starting their preseason like mid-month. It's a crazy time, but we've waited all spring and summer long for us, so let's have some fun. And a big thank you, as always, for making Locked On Cougars your first listen and or view of the day. And obviously a big thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well, right here on Locked On Cougars.